I guess there's some things I should tell you about the book. As the first chapter promises, the book is going to be about that trouble. The novel basically follows Nelson off into the countryside on tour with this group called Diciembre. Diciembre is based on a real group, theater troupe called Septiembre. Just as the idiot president is based on a real play called El Mandatario Idiota by my friend Walter Ventosilla. And Septiembre was part of, there was a lot of groups like this in the 70s and 80s, very political theater groups that used their plays to make political statements and sort of really, some of them were very extreme, and some of them were very brave, going places where they probably shouldn't have gone, and putting themselves in great danger. And as it happens, in 2000, no, when was this? 1999, I think. In 1999, the character Pata Larga and I went on a trip. I just met him, and for one reason or another, we hit it off, and we ended up going on a trip for about a month together into the mountains. And he told me all his stories about being in this theater troupe back in the day. And it really did strike me then that he was describing the most interesting time of his life, and he had sort of what Henry describes as got married and fallen into a very domestic existence in the city, and nothing that he'd ever done since had that excitement that he'd lived when he was running from the army, performing a play and getting harassed by the Shining Path, and then getting robbed by bandits and hiding under a tree, in a ravine or something. All these crazy stories that he told me that seemed incredibly scary, and he told them with such excitement and relish that you could tell that he was longing for that still. Of course, at the time, I had no idea this was going to be a novel. This was in 1999. I was like 6 years old. Not really, but I was very young, so I didn't know anything. But it's funny the way fiction works, because it came back and it came back and it came back, and many years later, I wanted to tell a story about Nelson and his brother Francisco, and about that age difference, and about the idea of one brother having kind of the keys to the kingdom in the guise of an American passport, and one brother who didn't have that. And as it happened, that's what would have happened to my family, because my sisters were both American citizens and I was not. And so it was kind of a thought experiment, thinking about what I would have done if I had stayed in Peru. My sisters would have left, of course, because the country was so unstable, and I would have been kind of stuck. So just as a thought experiment, I created Nelson, and I created Francisco, and I wanted to sort of play out this relationship and figure out what would have happened. But something terrible happened, and I wrote the first draft of that novel focusing on that relationship, and it was just absolutely dreadful. It was terrible. And I finished it then in 2010, and I showed it to a couple of friends, and I was really hoping that I was being hard on myself, and they were going to tell me, don't worry about it, it's pretty good. You can, and this is how I know they're very good friends, because they were like, you know what, man, this is really awful. So at the beginning of 2011, I had a 400-page draft of a really terrible book that I'd spent 3.5 years on, and I didn't know what to do. So I took a bit of time off from it, and I decided to try something else. And this is the other sort of, I guess, hopeful or serendipitous thing for those of you in the room who write fiction, or do any kind of art. Sometimes things happen for reasons that you can't really explain to yourself. So in the interim, from when I started that novel until 2011, I'd gotten really involved with the Peruvian prison system and gotten really interested in the criminal justice system in Peru, visited a number of prisons, and spent a lot of time investigating stuff. In 2009, I taught a 3-month workshop inside a place called Gancho, in Pabellon 7, Block 7. And I've gotten really interested in this place. And so I didn't have a novel to write because I didn't know what I was doing, so I pitched Harper's a story. I want to go to Peru, I want to go to Block 7, and I want to cover their internal elections. And they have these crazy totally organic and kind of self-generated system of democracy inside, one of the most dangerous prisons in Peru, probably the most overcrowded and certainly the largest. So I spent 2 weeks, a little more than 2 weeks going every day, and I spent one night inside to observe how they had created this election process. All this while I was on hiatus from the book, and as often happens if you have an assignment for a magazine like Harper's, they give you 8,000 words or whatever, but you have enough material to write 20,000 words. And so all this extra material was just hanging out, and I didn't know where to put it. And when I started rewriting in June of that year, I was fortunate enough to get a fellowship up at the Marin Headlands, which was a dream come true. And I had all this information about Henry, about his past that I hadn't even known. I should say that the entire tour that the novel, this is the trunk of the novel is the tour. None of that really was in the first book. I mean, when I started over, I really honestly started over. I threw it out completely and kept about 8 or 9 pages, and really just, I had a clean slate, and I was able, because I had now all this knowledge about the Peruvian prison system, to narrate Henry's life in prison, which ended up being a really super important part of the novel. Basically, they go off on tour and they run, headlong, boom, into Henry's past, and specifically into the wounds that Henry didn't even know he had from back in the day, from losing Rogelio, et cetera, et cetera. And the one who is the most directly affected by this collision between past and present is Nelson. And that's basically the novel, et cetera, et cetera. I won't tell you how it ends. But anyway, that's what I've got, but I'm super happy to answer any questions you might have. Yes?
Was there really something that happened in a Peruvian prison like that, where there been some disaster and a bunch of prisoners died?
Yeah, in I can't remember if it was 87 or 88. There was basically an uprising, and in lieu of, I guess they just put it down by blowing it up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I have written about that loosely a bunch of times, and I've gone, but I've never really, I'm not writing it exactly. None of what I write is history, So it's for me, it's one of those touchstone events because it's people mention it, and it's kind of a still open wound. But I never name the country that I'm writing about, and one of the reasons that I don't do that is because I don't want to have to get it right. So I use this prison uprising for my narrative, for whatever narrative purposes I need, and then I just, if someone's like, oh, there wasn't that many dead, or there was more, or there was less, or it wasn't that year, it's like, you know what, that's not really my concern. I'm more writing my version of that history.
Is there something special about Block 7? Because it sounded like you asked for that specifically.
Yeah, the question is, was there something special about Block 7? Yes. The short version of the answer is this, and it's not that short. But I'll try to read it. Basically, the entire prison it's inmates, criminals, men from Lima, and in very broad terms, every block corresponds to a neighborhood or a district of the city, right? And so you'll have, and I'm forgetting now which the blocks are, but like Block 12 is Villa Medio del Triunfo, or Block 8 is Villa Salvador, Block 6 is La Victoria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that only works for sort of, people from the city. As it happens, drug trafficking, the people who are in there for drug trafficking go to Block 7 and Block 9, and Block 7 and Block 9, the men come from either the provinces where they actually grow the coke in the jungle, or they're internationals. So you had in Block 7, Nigerians, Israelis, Colombians, Mexicans, Chileans, Spanish, American, Canadian, Turkish, Polish, you name it. I mean, it was insane. Maybe like 30 languages, and a real polyglot culture. And so what happens is, in all the other sections of the prison, because they are tied to the streets, so whoever's the boss of Block 6, La Victoria, say, corresponds to who's ever running La Victoria out in the streets, and they're allies. But if you're a bunch of, you know, coca farmers, and then a bunch of, like, you know, jet-setting narcos, who do you care who's running the corner at, you know, like Emancipacion and Grau? You know, you don't give a shit. So they have to create their own structure. And everywhere else, you know, in the blocks, basically the boss is like a Mubarak character who's just like the strongest guy around. But in the drug trafficking blocks, there's no natural power structure because they're just everyone's from everywhere. So what they end up doing is having democratic elections with secret ballot, with campaigns, with speeches and debates, with kissing babies. I mean, the whole thing.
Why do they want to, what's the advantage of being elected?
The advantage of being elected is that there's money in it, there's prestige, and it's also, I think, the elections themselves are just to break up the boredom. I mean, you know, they don't need to do it every year, but they do it every year because it's just it's a party, you know. I mean, it's something to do. You know, it's like they do it at the end of summer. There's not any soccer going on, so might as well. Yeah. So, any other questions?
I have more, but I feel like I'm.
There's one in the back. Okay.
It was a me who came out. There was sort of a disembodied narrator, and then all of a sudden there's me. And,
Yes.
and we just get a couple of, on occasions, we hear that there's actually a person who's talking to us.
Yeah.
Who is it? I guess we'll find out. But why do you dole that out so slowly? Why did you?
Yeah, that's a great question. The narrator. I mean, you know, if I'm reading it like this, you might not even notice it. You know, it feels almost like a third person narration. But then, yeah, there is a me voice that slips in. And to be honest, I put it in there at the beginning as just kind of seasoning. You know, I did it almost by accident. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But I had no idea what it meant. But what happens in fiction, it's kind of like Chekhov's gun, you know? Like, it's got to go off at a certain point, and the longer you wait for it to go off, you know, the more important it becomes. So the question of who that voice is, you know, if you answer it in 10 pages, then it's not a big deal. But if you don't answer for like 285 pages, then it's a really big deal. And you have to have a good answer. And I would get up and I would like wake up in the middle of the night, like, oh my God, who's telling my novel? Who's the narrator? And it was a very stressful question. But you know what? I liked the question. I feel like it gives the novel, or at least the way I was imagining was that it gives the novel a second source of narrative tension. You know, so that there's a question of who, you know, the two questions in the novel, I guess, are what happened to Nelson, and the second question is who's telling the story, and why, you know, and it became something that at the beginning you barely notice, and then I started amplifying it until the stories intersect, and hopefully in a way that makes sense.
How was it spending the night in the Rancho?
Spending the night in Lurigancho, I slept like a baby. It was terrific. I mean, it was the thing that you have to understand about a place like Lurigancho is that there are gradations of their standards. There are different standards of living, you know. And I certainly wasn't gonna sleep in a place where I might be in danger because I have a lot to live for. But I needed to stay because the debates, the speeches for the campaign happen after visiting hours are over. So basically it was right before the last election. So the head of the prison, he was like, when is it going to be published? And I was like, oh, Harper's takes forever. And he was like, okay, well I won't be here anyway, so whatever. and so I basically left my ID and it just didn't come out. And no one noticed till the next morning. And then the people that I really had to get permission from were the people in Block 7. And basically the Delegado General of the Pabellon, the boss of the Pabellon, you know, was very supportive of my project, and he gave me his cell, gave me his keys, because everyone, I mean, it was like a college dorm room. And then he put a guy in front of my door to protect me. You know? But I mean, I could lock it from the inside, like it was totally fine. It wasn't scary at all. What I got to see that I didn't expect to see which is one of the reasons of the title of the novel, is, I mean, how boring, you know? It's so boring, you know, when you're stuck and you have nowhere to go. And there was, I've been playing with the idea of this phrase that now we walk in circles a lot because of a number of reasons, because of the references to Guy Debord and the society of spectacle and all this business. But when I was inside the prison and I saw, after the debate and after the, like, you know, the chongo of the debate and the drums and everyone's like watching, you know, 350, 400 men inside this open prison atrium with, you know, playing salsa music and then giving these speeches and then rebuttals and everyone, you know, there's the ayayeros and there's a guy with the drums and there's like a bunch of, you know, drug-addled lunatics on the top floor just making noise. And I mean, it was this amazing scene. And then afterwards everyone's kind of like, ah, and they go out to the yard and they just walk like this, like it was a track, you know? They're walking in circles. And it was really pretty on some level, and it was also super sad, you know? It's just like the same way that in, you know, Latin America, you have dinner and then you go out for a walk and you come home, but it's like, in this way, they literally walk up the yard and down the yard, you know? And so then that image became very important for me. But spending the night in Rio was amazing. It was an amazing experience, and I mean, Lurigancho is an amazing place. I go back every chance I get. You know, I go back. You know, sometimes I go straight from the airport. You know, I really love it. I really love it. I love the people that I've met there and the stories and you know. And every time they say me, loquito, ya volviste otra vez. You know, they're like, what are you doing here? And I just, you know, I mean, they like. They like everything on Facebook. They're like, super, you know, I mean, I've been doing it for a while now. It's not like I've been once, you know. I mean, I've been dozens of times in prison and spent hours and hours, you know, there, and gone not like a dozen times in a month, but like dozens of times over the course of like 6 years now, you know. So I think that the people that recognize me know that I'm not there just to take something and go, you know. I'm going to be back, and if I write something that they don't like, they're going to tell me about it, you know, and I'm not going to hide from them. I'm going to go back and back and back. So, yeah. Maybe one more question, if you have any? Yes?
Is this in Spanish?
Is the book in Spanish? Not yet. It will be in Spanish in March or April.
And was your article translated? Could they read it?
The article was translated, yeah. It came out in Etiqueta Negra, which is a magazine published in Peru. And it went directly to the prison library, and it was passed around, and some guys commented on it, and some guys who had said they didn't want to be in it, then were like super pissed that they weren't in it. And I was like, but you told me you didn't want to be in it. And he's like, but I didn't mean that. So, yeah, there was a bunch of that. But it's funny, you know, when I first went to go present my book in the prison, they were all sheepish, you know, because I've made they invited me to this big ceremony to give the book to the library. I'm talking about my previous book. And then I showed up, and they already had my book pirated. And so they were like, oh, and they felt really bad, and they all pretended they were like, oh, we didn't realize it was pirated. And I was like, yeah, you didn't realize the gigantic blue bubble letters, like, you know, and the like stray hair on the photocopy page. But I just played it cool. Anyway, okay, yes, last question.
Do you have much experience with American prisons? Because I'm worrying about the comparison. Because I have the feeling American prisons are a whole lot more severe and dehumanizing than what you've experienced.
You know, it's a really interesting. It's kind of a paradox, you know, because on the one hand, American prisons, they're more ordered. You know, the regime of control is much harsher and much more present. In Peruvian prisons, in many Peruvian prisons, basically the authorities control the door, and they don't control what happens beyond the door. So what you have is a very organic, humane. You have people who can have a life, you know. On the other hand, you also have like rampant drug use, you know, tons of corruption, drugs and alcohol, prostitution, weapons, you know, like hand grenades and guns and knives and all kinds of crazy stuff. and a lot of violence, you know, because it's all, they police themselves. So, but yeah, you know, you go to Block 7, and if you're, you know, in the business and you've got money, Block 7 is like, you know, pretty great, you know, because, you know, bands come to play every Wednesday. They've got great restaurants. No, really, like excellent. Like every time I go, I eat excellent food there, like as good as what you eat on the outside. They, you know, alcohol. They watch the Champions League games on cable. I went to interview one dude who was the boss of at the time he was the taita of number 5, right? A guy named Papicha, and his like you know, right hand man was playing Farmville on the computer. You know what I mean? So it's like this totally disconnected thing, and so if you're the boss, or you're well off, or even, you know, middle class inside a place like Ruigancho, yeah, you have a pretty decent life, you know. But the flip side is, if you don't have anything, you know, it's very easy to fall into like terrible drug abuse. There's 300 some odd homeless men inside the prison who literally don't have anywhere to sleep because you're not given a place to sleep. Like if you are from La Victoria, then people from La Victoria take you in. But if you're not from there, or if you're from there and you start stealing because you have a drug habit, there's no one to help you. And you'll end up, you know, a shell of yourself in a matter of months. And so it's hard for me to compare. I mean, both you know, prison is inherently a dehumanizing place. You know what I mean? And there's nothing good about it. It just so happens that in this particular prison, in a prison like that, if you know, I mean, I would rather go to that prison because you know, I would go to Block 7. I would have, you know, a fair amount of money. I would have a nice little cell. I would watch Champions League, you know, and it would be fine. But I wouldn't want to be poor there because you'd be literally like sleeping on the ground outside in the elements, and you might not have any food to eat for, you know, on any given day, you know. I don't think that people go hungry. I mean, I don't know, but it seems to me that most American prisons, you probably, at the very least, are going to get fed. It might not be tasty, but you'll get fed. So it's hard to compare. Okay, thank you so much for coming. I want to thank someone really special who came. It was his first time ever seeing me read. His name is Leon. Do you want to stand up, Leon? Yeah, and I'm happy to sign books if you've got them, Leon.
Okay, sure, you're gonna play on the
Yeah, thank you.